Alright guys, I'm starting a couple nightstands and I am using this material that is from a company called Richlight. It is a compressed paper material. It's super dense and super heavy. So you'll see here that it takes multiple passes with a track saw to cut it apart. So first I broke it down into manageable pieces because it's super heavy, as I said. And then I go back and I cut miters because I'm going to be making the shell of the nightstands first. So I go through and I cut all my pieces. I believe they're like 20 by 20. And I cut miters on them. I definitely need to be careful with these because they were super wicked sharp once you cut those miters on it. Once I cut them out, I started to lay them out to get them oriented. I was making two of these at the same time, so I definitely just didn't want to mix up my pieces, and I want to be able to keep things somewhat organized as I was building these. So just a simple, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, nothing crazy. I did dry fit these and was trying to make markings for the biscuits that I'd cut in. And, after the fact, I realized I didn't really need to put it together, but I think I mostly just wanted to put it together to see how it looked. So you can see here I am marking for biscuits. I wanted to use biscuits to just help it from sliding once I was getting ready to get it glued up, and it just kind of helps strengthen that joint a little bit over time. Nothing too crazy. I just put a couple in to, again, help when I go to get them glued up. Before I glue up, though, I want to router the inside pieces and get them all cleaned up before I glue it so that it looks cleaner and slicker. So here I am just routering and sanding the face and that round to, again, be clean once these pieces come together. So here's a 2-part epoxy that I'm using. I will admit that gluing this together by myself was kind of difficult. When I did the second one, I actually got assistance from my son, and it went a lot smoother. This was a hot mess fiasco trying to get those clamps on and get everything square before that glue hardened. This first one actually was a little bit out of square because that glue hardened so fast. But I'm able to fix this in the future. Here I am making the carcass for the cabinet that will go inside. Now, the reason I'm building the cabinet after the shell and not before is because I was limited on the material I had for the shell, and it would be easier to build the cabinet inside and make it right versus the other way around. Here I am putting a dado stack on the table saw so that I could cut a bunch of rabbets into the cabinet pieces to help get it put together inside of the shell. Pretty simple. I just run a rabbet on the outside of a few of the pieces, and you'll see here in a second how that comes together. I did cut the top piece of this cabinet deeper than the rest of it, and that will come into play later as well. Once I had all my pieces cut out, I was ready to glue it into the cabinet. So here I am just adding some quick and thick glue and gluing them in place inside the shell. You don't really see it, but there in my hand is a spacer, and that was to help me get the setback exactly where I needed it. And then this bottom piece slides right along that rabbet and gets it put into place, and here at the top as well. And then once I was done getting that in place, I glue in the back piece, and as you can see right there, that top part of the board sticks out past the rest of the cabinet. The wood that I'm using for this will be some ash. This is actually nightstands to complement a bed frame that I made about a year ago. And so I'm using the same ash that I used on the bed frame in this project. Here I am getting ready to run it through the planer. I cut it down to manageable pieces to put it on a planer sled so that I could run it through the planer to clean it all up. You could have jointed them. I could have, made smaller pieces and glued them back together, but if I didn't have to have a seam in my pieces, I wasn't going to. So using what I have and doing a little bit extra work to make it so it looks a little bit cleaner in the long run. So once my pieces were cut, I get a fresh cut on one side, and I just use my track saw, clean that other side up through the table saw. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a face frame for that cabinet that I just made. So I run the board through the table saw a couple times, making 1/4-inch strips that I can go back and cut and glue on to the face frame. And I'm just going to apply those with some pin nails. I went with a super thin face frame on this because you're never going to see it, one. And two, I want my drawer faces to sit flush with this shell. So I was trying to maximize the space that I'd have for a drawer. But once these are on, it's time to make the drawer boxes. Now, I've been making drawer boxes for a while. I kind of just have a way that I do it. I'm not super particular about doing a 1/4-inch bottom and 1/2-inch sides or whatever. I usually just cut everything out of the 1/2-inch material and go with that. I don't know why I do it like that. That's just how I do it. Anyways, here I am cutting them all down and swapping out that blade again for that dado stack so that I could run a dado to put the drawer bottom in. I honestly want a setup where I have one table saw that has a dado stack on it all the time and one that just has a blade on it all the time, because I am swapping these out constantly. But until then, I will continue to swap them out. So as I said, dado on the bottom for the drawer bottom. Now it's one of those minor things that nobody would notice if you don't say anything, but I didn't really want to see that exposed plywood edge when I opened up the drawers every time. So here I am again cutting out some strips of that ash that I will end up gluing to the top of my drawer pieces to kind of hide the fact that they're made out of plywood and hopefully make them look more like a solid box, but mostly just to hide that plywood look. So once I got all these strips cut, it was time to get them glued onto these drawer pieces. So you can see here, I'm just using one of these nice screw wooden clamps that everyone's grandpa owns. I love them, to be honest. They're probably one of my favorite clamps to use. But I clamped one of those to my workbench to make this easier. And as you can see, all I'm doing here is running a bead of glue onto the plywood drawer pieces and then kind of gluing it or taping in place the strip. And then once it's in place, I'm able to go back and add some clamps to, add some pressure down to it and keep it clamped down. So you can see here, I kind of have a good old farm of all these drawer pieces. So we're going to do some YouTube magic here and unclamp them. We're going to cut everything now down to size. So drawer boxes for me, I usually do my 2 side pieces long and then my front and back piece sandwiched in between to help with pressuring. But before we get that far, I gotta, again, go back and trim off that strip. It's maybe like a big 1/16 off both sides. So I just have a flush trim bit here to flush up the drawer pieces. And then obviously once everything's flushed up, I will head over and sand everything. So nothing complicated, but it's definitely obviously easier and smarter to sand everything before you assemble it. And here you see me assembling it with just some pin nails and glue. Now, there's probably going to be some people out there that are going to give me some hate. There's all sorts of ways to put drawer boxes together. You use pocket holes, dowels, finger joints. I just use pin nails or brad nails. It does a pretty good job. The plan was to go back afterwards and add some dowels, but I just didn't get to it. Once the drawer boxes were made, though, I'm able to get the drawer slides installed inside that cabinet. And these are the undermount soft close ones. And off camera, I was able to cut these notches into these drawers and install the hardware underneath. But here you go, seeing me install them, make sure that drawer slides. But now that the cabinetry is done, it's time to build some metal bases for these shelves. So this is to help tie again the bed frame that I made into it. All my cuts here are just going to be straight cuts. So I'll make 4 legs, which will be what I weld all the front and side pieces to. And as long as I do and cut everything square and right, everything should be plumb and level once I go to weld it and add the shell to it. Once I get all these pieces cut though, I need to kind of prep it for welding, and so to do that, I just lightly grind all the corners to give somewhere for my weld bead to rest and sit. And then I go back and I just clamp everything together and weld it all together. I am definitely still learning how to weld and run weld beads. I'm sure that once you see my weld beads on this, you would probably complain. But 1, it sits on the floor, and 2, as I've already stated, I'm practicing and learning. So the best way to do that is on your own projects. As you can see, I welded some tabs on inside of the frame, and that is for the ability to attach the shell to that base. So here I am just drilling out the holes until I got them big enough for the bolts that I will use down the line. Couldn't find my step bit, so all I'm doing here is using a small drill bit and just going up in size until I get to the hole that size that I need. Now I'm going to draw the hole placement on the shell. So just put it on here, drill myself some holes. I'll go back with a center finder, pop a center finder on that. So the manufacturer will tell you to use carbine tip tools to cut and drill into this material. I didn't actually have carbine tipped Forstner bits. I've had the same bits for a long time, so these definitely burned these bits and doled them out. This took a minute. I actually had to use a couple different methods to do it on the last one. But as you see, I got them here, and the reason why I'm drilling such a big hole is because I need a place for some threaded inserts to go, and putting it into this material would actually not be ideal because it kind of pulls it apart. So the idea is to make some plugs out of some plywood, glue these in using some epoxy, is what I do, and then after I glue them in, I will put those bases back on and use a drill bit to get the actual center, because I don't think the center that was on these actually ended up being where they needed to be. But this worked really, really well. I was actually pretty pleased with myself coming up with this idea. I didn't actually have a plan going into this how I was going to do it. I thought about drilling a hole all the way through the material and bolting it through, which would have probably also worked, but this kind of just was a test for the future because I plan on using this material again to see how well this would work. So I think the only thing I would do different is probably just remove the center of the hole bit, like the drill bit, and just have that as a solid plug. But this worked great. I do go back and have to sand those down a little bit. They're sticking up about a big 16th, maybe an 1/8 proud. But you can see I packed the side there with the super glue. So here I am installing the threaded inserts after I had got my centers correct. And again, this just works perfect. And it looks super clean once it's all done. Everything's flush and flat. And as you can also see, I'm just using a little bit of super glue to make sure that those threaded inserts stay in place once they're in, because threaded inserts can continue to spin afterwards if you don't get them locked in place. Now, I was back and forth on what kind of finishes I was going to use on everything. But I decided to start doing the finish on the base and the shell part because it would take a couple coats and I wanted it to sit a long period so things had time to cure. So for the bases, I'm just using a hammered paint that looks really cool. It has a really fine hammered texture once it dries. I actually really like it. And then for the shell, I will be using a oil-based product that you would just use on wood. And it takes it from being a slate gray to almost black that you'll see here in a second. So it's just a rub on, rub off process, nothing crazy. But again, I wanted this to really kind of sit and cure before I started on the drawer fronts. So the drawer fronts, I milled down all the material at the same time I milled down material for the face frame. And so again, it's just this ash wood that I've had for a long time, and it's the same ash that is from the bed frame. But goes through just basic processes, cutting them down, putting roundovers on them, and sanding them. The thing that I mostly was trying to do when I was cutting these out was finding the most character that I could get out of the wood. Between the shells being black and the bases being black, this ash is what's going to be what stands out and is the focal point of these nightstands. So I was able to find some really cool wood that had character and some figure in it. But once everything was cut, routed, and sanded, it was time to add finish to these. So the finish on these I'm using is a oil-based polyacrylic, and it ambers quite a bit once it's added. But the finish that I used on the bed frame ambered quite a bit, so I wanted those to match. And they looked really good once the finish was on it. I want to point out real quick, if you see on the back there, that cord, and that was a power strip that I had built into the back so that these could sit up against the wall. Anyways, now that everything is done, it's time to assemble it, starting with the base. And the base is just bolts through those tabs that go into the threaded inserts that we put in. So you just finger tighten those bolts, and then you go back and add an Allen wrench to tighten them down. And then I will go and add the drawer fronts on. So I use the double-sided tape method, which is putting double-sided tape on the drawer boxes and then putting your drawer faces onto that and just kind of pushing it into place. You'll see that I use some cards as spacers here in a second to line everything up. And this is just kind of stuff that's done off camera. So there's enough cards on each side to make those equal. So I'll push those on just like that. I screwed those on. I don't think you see me do it on this one. Here's a little bit more in depth. So I get it clamped in place first, and then drill some pilot holes, add some screws, and everything gets put into place. For drawer handles, I am going to just have some low profile ones that sit on the top of the drawers. I didn't want to take away from the drawer fronts as they're the main focus once these are in place. So this project's a wrap. If you liked this kind of content, I would love it if you subscribed, followed, shared, commented. Here they are, all wrapped up. I really, again, loved how these turned out. I appreciate you guys watching till the end, and guys, we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.